Hello there, Robert John Hadfield from Audio Mover here again with another cassette tape that we're going to take apart and look inside. Today the tape we're looking at is a TDK SM10. TDK, if you didn't know, is one of the real big players making cassette tapes back when cassette tapes were being made. They were a really important company. And so the interesting thing about this particular tape, though, is you'll see that it says SM10, and what the 10 means in this case is it's a 10-minute tape. And you know, a lot of times what this would say, the number would be 60, 90, something like that, which means that if it was 90, for example, then there'd be 45 minutes of recording time or playing time on each side of the tape. In this case, there's only 10 minutes. So tapes like this were really popular for, well, I'll just give you a perfect example. There's one song on this tape because it was a demo from my band back in the 90s, I think. And that's what people would use these for often, is just if they wanted to send a single song. There wasn't just something very simple they wanted to send off, and they didn't want to have somebody have to deal with this whole, with a whole long tape. And one of the reasons would be perhaps they'd have one song on one side, one song on the other. And it just made it just felt a little more professional to send something like that. A 10-minute tape that somebody could just fast forward, rewind very quickly and get around. Anyway, that's what we're looking at here, a 10-minute tape. Looks like one of the screws has already been taken out. I have no idea why. But like a lot of cassette tapes, this one is put together with screws, and like other videos we've made, there's five screws holding this one together. You'll also see, if you can see this, that it says Type 2, high position. Type 2 was chrome. There were really three kinds of tapes that we're familiar with that were kind of the standards, and one of them was Type 1, Type 2, and then, believe it or not, Type 4. So Type 1 was oxide, Type 2 was chrome, Type 4 was metal, and Type 3 never really took off. It was kind of a variation on Type 1. So this was a Type 2 tape. We also knew that as chrome. And this tape is not rewound. I'm going to see if I can spin it backwards a little bit, and then we can see what the leader looks like before we open it up. And these are, once again, really easy to rewind and fast forward, because you can see right there, that's all the tape. There's just not a lot of tape in here, so it's 5 minutes on each side. So you look right here, you'll see the leader tape. That's always the clear tape. I'm going to spin it forward a little bit. And then there you can see where you have the leader tape is connected to the oxide tape, and it's being held together by a little piece of adhesive. And when we open this up, you'll be able to see on the back how that adhesive holds those two things together. There's the pressure pad, which we will see in just a second when we open this up. So let's go ahead, and we're going to remove the remaining 4 screws. Once again, not sure why the one is missing. This tape, I've had this tape, like I said, from the 90s. I just pulled this out of a box because I thought this might be interesting to show everybody and take a look at how this works. So we only have the 4 screws. While I'm doing this, don't forget to like this video if you like the video, subscribe to the channel, etc., all that normal stuff. Okay, there's the tapes, or the screws. Once you get the screws out, it's a real easy thing just to lift it off generally. So, and I've mentioned this before, but the screws, whatever side the screws are on, is usually side A. And that's almost always true. There was only one brand of tape that I'm familiar with that didn't do that, and it was BASF, and they, for some reason, had the screws on side B. So we've got the screws out. We're going to go ahead and lift this off. Usually it comes off really easily. This one wasn't too much different. Now, normally, there's a gasket that's sitting on top. You'll see that the gasket itself is just kind of stayed stuck to this other side. And you'll also see that in this case, it's totally transparent. So we're just going to leave that there. And the purpose of this gasket, if you haven't seen the other videos, is to put a little bit of pressure on either side of the tape as it winds onto the spool to keep it nice and tightly wound. Some worked better than others, but it kept it from rubbing the outside edges of the tape from rubbing against the plastic. It gave it this very smooth surface, and then once again put a very, very slight amount of pressure so that it would spool it up really neatly. Okay, so then, you'll see this actually looks, this is a very, very standard what you find on the inside of a tape. It's very normal looking. The clear gasket. The other thing that we see here is we have this little metal shield, we have the pressure pad, and then we have these little wheels. And these wheels actually are supposed to spin freely. These do. Yeah, that one spins too. What happens is as the tape is spinning, those things will just help it move smoothly across through the main area where the playhead comes up and reads the magnetic information on the tape. So what I'm going to do here is take a couple of these things out. So this right here, once again, like I said, is a little shield, and it sits right behind the pressure pad. And then what it does is, the playhead, which is shaped something like this, when you push play, it goes up and it touches the tape. And if you're recording, there's a little bit of magnetism that's coming off of there. And this little shield, for all intents and purposes, protects the rest of the tape from that's on the spools from that magnetic field. So I'm going to put this back in. And then I'm going to pull out sometimes I have to get in really close and look because these things are very small, hard to see sometimes. And then I'm going to pull out this pressure pad. Now I want you to see what this looks like. This is, once again, the inside of this tape is very normal, kind of standard. I can't quite grab it. There we go. So this pressure pad, this looks a slightly different design than some of the others. How it gets wide on the sides. It's got a hole there in the middle. This is basically a little tiny piece of felt, and you can see that it has these little corners right there, and that helps it basically float in place right there. And the purpose of this pressure pad, we're going to put this back in. You can see how it kind of hooks on either side of that, the little metal shield. Well, what this is supposed to do, it's not sitting in there quite right. Let me get it in place. There we go. So what this is supposed to do, as the tape, and by the way, if you ever do this, wash your hands really well. I've tried doing this with plastic gloves and little instruments, tweezers and things, and it's just so hard that I just kind of got to a point where I thought I have to use my fingers when I do this. So I just wash my hands really good so that if you do have to touch if you do have to touch the oxide tape, you won't get your oils and what have you all over it. So this stuff's a little bit difficult to work with, but so hopefully you'll be able to see this. This is the oxide over here, and then over here this is the leader tape, and they're held together. I'm going to flip it over. You'll see spanning those two things, you'll see what is in essence these get really challenging to work with sometimes. So let me just pull all this out and it'll just make it a little easier to look at. And then you can watch me struggle to get it back on the spool. You can see on this side that there's some adhesive that spans the leader tape and the oxide. And then you can see on this side, you can only see the piece of it because the leader is of course clear. And then there it is on the back. And that really is, this is just basically, for all intents and purposes, this is a little piece of tape that holds the two things together. So now what I'm going to do, this is all kind of spun and it makes it a little difficult to work with, and I'm going to try to do this so you can kind of see what I'm doing. But once again, you try not to handle it too much, but it gets a little challenging to not handle it. So what I'll sometimes do is just hold the tape kind of in place with my fingers on the edges, and then I will just try to spin it and kind of hold it there while it's spinning. And I'll need to straighten this out, of course, on this side. So I'm just going to spin it a little bit more. And little by little that's spooling up. We've got lot of it there spooled up. We're going to do just a little bit more. It's really, it's really not easy sometimes working with this stuff, especially when it's really, really thin. Because not all cassette tape was the same, and sometimes the cassette tape was the way they would make the tape itself would actually be thinner than other tapes. So, for example, a 60-minute tape, you know, the 60-minute tape and 100-minute tapes, I mean, they're literally twice the size. So how do you fit twice as much tape in a standard cassette housing? Well, what they would do is they'd make the tape slightly thinner. That way you could hold more tape on the same spool in the same space in the same housing, because all cassette housings are the same. You really could take pretty much any wheel from another cassette tape and put it in here and make this whole thing just function. So sometimes actually that happens here in the studio. We will get a tape housing that's broken, or in order for us to get into it, because there's no screws, we have to actually crack it open. We will take the tape, put it in another housing, and it just works fine. I mean, it's actually a relatively simple process once you know how to open it up and close it back up. And we keep extra housings here in the studio just for that reason. So you'll see right here, what's supposed to happen is that the tape, right now what you're seeing is a leader tape. It goes around this post right here. It goes past this wheel. It's supposed to go in between these grooves, past the wheel, around the post, and then up onto that reel over there. And then what you try to do when you're putting these things back together, this is really helpful if you do this. Get the tape, get both reels kind of in their spot. Hold this one, and then make sure this one's nice and tight. And then if you need to, you can hold them like that in place, and then that'll help you guide the tape down in between the little, it'll help you guide the tape down into the guides. Now it looks like our pressure pad got moved out of place a little bit. So I'm gonna come in here and try to fix that. There we go. So now everything is back the way it's supposed to be. And then what I'm gonna do is we're gonna take this, and what happens sometimes is then the gasket will fall off as we're putting it back together, which it didn't, which is, oh, there it goes. So then we have to kind of set the gasket in place. Hope you can see that because it is transparent, but there's this little plastic gasket on both sides. And so now what we're gonna do, now that we've seen this, that's what basically 5 minutes of tape. Now when I say 5 minutes, it's 10 minutes because it's 5 minutes on each side. Just like a 90-minute tape is 45 minutes on each side, so it's actually 45 minutes of tape. So in this case, it's 5 minutes of tape, 5 minutes each side, so that's where they come up with the SM10. So we're gonna try to just close this and see if it'll just, if it'll get back on nice and smooth. Sometimes it goes on smoothly, sometimes they make you work for it a little bit. Looks like everything went back in place pretty smoothly. We started out with only 4 screws, so I'm gonna put these 4 screws back in. And TDK, you know, they've been, I think the business started back in the, 30s. They go way, way, way back. And getting these screws in, sometimes if they don't thread right initially, you'll have a little bit of a time getting them in. But anyway, they usually go back in pretty smooth. Okay, that one went back in smoothly. We have one more to put in, and then we'll be all done here. So we're putting that screw back in, and then we'll just kind of look at the tape again, all finished. So if you ever needed to open up a tape, that's how you do it. That's what a TDK SM10 looks like on the inside. And hope you enjoyed that, and have a great day.